She was rejected at midnight, left to die in the freezing dark. But before dawn broke, another alpha found her. And the moment he touched her, his wolf whispered one word: mate. The moon had never looked so indifferent. It hung high over the Shadow Ridge clearing, a pale silver disk veiled by thin clouds, watching as if the lives below were nothing more than fleeting shadows against the snow. Torches lined the ring of black stone pillars, their flames bending and snapping in the winter wind, casting restless light over the gathered pack. Lena stood at the edge of the ritual circle, fingers buried in the worn seam of her cloak, nails pressing into the stitched ridge to keep her hands from shaking. Omegas weren't supposed to stand near the front, but tonight was different. Tonight, every unmated wolf had been summoned. Tonight, the midnight moon would decide, or so they had always been told. "Head up," murmured Cassia beside her, nudging her shoulder. "You're not prey." Lena exhaled slowly and lifted her chin. Cassia could say that. Cassia wasn't an Omega. She was a warrior, broad-shouldered and steady, with a faint scar down one cheek and a wolf that the others respected. Still, she'd chosen to stand beside Lena instead of with the warriors clustered near the front, and Lena clung to that small loyalty like a lifeline. Eyes pressed against her from every side. She could feel them, hot as coals against her skin. Pack elders in heavy cloaks embroidered with silver thread. Ranked wolves in their leather and fur, smelling of iron and pine and power. Young women in careful braids and borrowed velvet, hearts beating fast with hope. And then there were those who watched her with something colder, the ones who had always believed Omegas were only tolerated, never truly accepted. The snow underfoot had been trampled into a slick, packed ring. Her boots were damp. A stray wind tugged at the loose curls that had escaped the simple knot at the nape of her neck. She had tried to make herself presentable, plain dark dress mended at the seams, cloak brushed until the worn wool lay smooth, the thin silver bracelet that had been her mother's polished until it gleamed. It still felt like she had brought pebbles to a feast of jewels. "Lena?" Cassia's voice was softer now. "You don't have to do this if—" "The summons was for everyone," Lena said quietly. "If I didn't show up, it would be an insult to the moon, and to the Alpha." Cassia's jaw clenched. "The Alpha doesn't deserve the courtesy." "Maybe not." Lena's lips curved faintly. "But I do." The answering smile in Cassia's eyes was brief but real. A horn sounded then, 3 long, low notes that rolled over the clearing like distant thunder. The crowd shifted, bodies drawing closer to the circle, voices dropping to a hush. Torches crackled. Somewhere in the trees beyond, a single wolf howled, the sound long and raw, then cut off abruptly. Lena's heart thudded once, hard as a fist against bone. The midnight moon-claiming ritual had always hovered at the edge of her childhood, more story than reality. She remembered sitting on her father's knee, listening to whispers of sacred bonds awakened under moonlight, of alphas who felt the tug of fate like a claw in the chest the moment their mate stepped into the circle. "Some bonds are born sleeping," he had told her once, his voice rough but kind as he adjusted the too large cloak around her shoulders. "But the moon doesn't forget, even if others do." That had been before sickness hollowed him out, before the pack forgot the carpenter who had fixed their roofs and mended their chairs, before she became the quiet girl who kept to the edges, taking scraps of work others didn't want. Tonight, she stood in a place she had never expected to stand, at the very front of the unclaimed, under the full gaze of the Alpha, because the Alpha had summoned her specifically. Her stomach knotted. She forced herself not to look at him yet, not until she had to. The horn's echo faded, and the Alpha stepped into the circle. Darius Nightfall wore authority like a second skin. His black hair was pulled back at the nape of his neck, revealing the hard lines of his face and the pale scar that cut from temple to jaw. The heavy cloak on his shoulders was clasped with a silver wolf's head, and when he moved, the crowd moved with him, as if the entire pack breathed in time with his steps. Behind him walked the elders and his chosen inner circle. Warriors, advisors, those who mattered. Lena lowered her gaze as he approached, not from obedience, but because the weight of his presence made her bones feel brittle. "Pack of Shadow Ridge," Darius's voice carried easily over the cold air. "Tonight, under the midnight moon, we stand as our ancestors did, for the claiming of mates, for the recognition of bonds, for the strengthening of our bloodlines and our future." Murmurs rose and fell around her like the tide. Lena let his words pass over her. She already knew the ritual's sequence. Names would be called. Pairs would step forward. Some wolves would feel the pull of the moon, the sharp, undeniable click of recognition. Others would stand in silence, bonds unawakened or absent. But this year, there was something new, something no one could stop whispering about. The Alpha had announced he would choose a mate. An Alpha's choice could change everything: alliances, territory, the pack standing with neighboring lands. Any unmated woman of age could be called to the circle. Ranking females had been preening for weeks. The less ranked had simply prayed. Lena hadn't done either. Until the summons bearing the Alpha's seal had arrived at her door that afternoon, its wax unbroken and heavy in her hand. Omegas weren't summoned. Omegas were tolerated at the edges, needed for quiet, thankless tasks, not for rituals that decided the future of the pack. She hadn't opened the seal for a long time. When she did, her hands had gone numb. "You will present yourself at the midnight moon," claiming ritual. Her name, written in a hand that was not the Alpha's, stark and real. Cassia had nearly torn the paper in half with outrage. "He can't possibly. This has to be a mistake. I'll speak to—" "No." Lena had folded the summons carefully, even as her pulse thundered in her ears. "If it's a mistake, they'll realize it tonight. If it's not—" She hadn't finished the sentence. Because if it wasn't, it meant something else. Something she didn't quite dare hope for. Now, standing in the icy circle, she felt that sliver of hope wither. She could taste the anticipation in the air, but none of it was for her. Darius lifted his hand. "Tonight, as the moon witnesses, we will honor the bonds she awakens, and the right of every wolf to choose. No wolf will be bound unwilling." A low hum of approval rolled through the crowd. Lena blinked. That was new. The wording had changed. Cassia's fingers brushed her sleeve. "He's trying to sound merciful," she muttered under her breath. "That never ends well." Names were called. Pairs stepped into the circle. Some left it with new bonds glowing faintly between them, a shimmer of energy that made the hairs on Lena's arms lift. Others stepped back alone, carefully blank-faced, hiding disappointment. Time blurred. The torches burned lower. Frost crept in delicate patterns up the blackstone pillars. The moon slid a little higher in the sky. And then Lena heard her own name. Lena Ashwood. The world narrowed to a single sound. Her name, spoken in the clear, clipped voice of Elder Maris. Cassia's hand squeezed her arm once, hard. Then Lena was moving, her feet carrying her into the circle as if someone else controlled her body. The eyes of the entire pack pressed in, sharp as claws, heavy as stone. She stopped in the center of the ring, where the snow had been worn down to bare, frozen earth. The air felt thinner here, cleaner somehow, as if every breath was being measured. The moonlight seemed whiter, more focused, turning her breath into silver vapor. "Step forward," Elder Maris said, "and present yourself to the Alpha." Lena lifted her chin because she refused to let them see her shake, and turned toward Darius. His gaze met hers, flat and assessing. There was no warmth in it, no spark of recognition, no flicker that said this moment meant anything beyond obligation. He stepped into the circle opposite her, boots crunching over ice. The pack's murmur died down into a taut silence. Lena's heartbeat roared in her ears. She waited for something. A pull, a warmth, a whisper from the moon like the old stories spoke of. Nothing came. The wind moved through the trees, and the torches spat sparks. Darius's nostrils flared as he drew in her scent. His face remained impassive. Elder Maris's voice took on a ceremonial cadence. Under the eye of the midnight moon, does the Alpha of Shadowridge acknowledge a bond with this wolf? Does he recognize in her the mate chosen for him by the moon's will? Lena's hands curled into fists inside her sleeves, nails biting into skin. The moon was silent. Her wolf was silent. The bond, if it existed at all, lay quiet and unfelt, like a seed buried too deep in frozen ground. Darius looked at her as if weighing something. Then he lifted his head, and his verdict fell like an axe. "No," he said, voice ringing out over the clearing. "I do not." The words sliced cleanly through the air. A tremor went through the crowd, small gasps, a sharp intake of breath, a hissed whisper quickly stifled. Public rejections were rare, but not forbidden. Still, to reject an Omega he himself had summoned to the circle, that was something else entirely. Heat rushed to Lena's face, then drained away so fast she swayed. For a heartbeat, she forgot how to breathe. Elder Maris's eyes flicked toward her, unreadable. "And do you, Lena Ashwood, accept this rejection and release any claim you might hold upon the Alpha?" The ritual demanded her answer. The law demanded it. If she refused, she would not only shame herself, but Cassia, the few who had ever shown her kindness, even her father's memory. Her throat felt tight. The rejection pulsed in the air between them, vivid as a bruise. "No wolf will be bound unwilling," Darius had said. She swallowed. Her voice came out thin. She steadied it. "I accept." The words were soft, but the silence was so complete that every wolf heard them. Something in her chest cracked, not loudly, not dramatically, but with the quiet finality of ice under too much weight. Elder Maris raised her staff. "So witnessed. Under the midnight moon, any tie between these two is severed. Lena Ashwood stands unclaimed." The staff struck the ground. Once. Twice. The sound echoed through Lena's bones. It should have ended there. A simple rejection, clean and cold, leaving her to slink back to the edge of the crowd and disappear into the shadows of her tiny house until the whispers faded. But Elder Maris did not step back. "By decree of pack law," she said, her voice rising so the full clearing could hear, "an Omega rejected under the midnight moon is stripped of pack protection." A ripple spread through the crowd. "From this moment," the elder continued, "Lena Ashwood may not claim shelter, aid, or protection under pack law." She turned her gaze fully upon Lena. "You may remain within Shadowridge territory only until dawn. If no mate claims you before then, exile will be formally enacted. Once enacted, it is final. You will cross the border and may never return." The staff struck the frozen ground once. So witnessed. The world tilted. Lena stared at the elder, though her vision had begun to blur at the edges. The words made sense individually, but together they sounded like another language. Exile. By dawn. "Surely that clause hasn't been invoked in years," someone muttered near the front. "It's still law," another voice said. "She's an Omega, not a ranked wolf. Mercy has different boundaries." "Exile is mercy?" Cassia's voice, sharp and low, slicing through the whispers. Elder Maris's gaze did not waver. "Lena Ashwood, do you understand the terms?" Lena's tongue felt heavy. She forced it to move. If I can bring a mate to stand beside me by dawn." "Who willingly claims you before the pack," the elder confirmed, "then you may remain among us. If you cannot, you will cross the border at dawn and not return." There was no room for pleading. It was all wrapped in ritual, in the language of law and tradition that left no gaps to squeeze through. Her wolf stirred weakly, a low, wounded sound in the back of her mind. She had no mate, no secret suitor waiting in the trees, no bond humming under her skin ready to awaken. They were giving her a choice that wasn't a choice at all. Darius had not moved. He watched her with the same cold detachment he might give a weather report. Not cruelty, not kindness, simply a hard line drawn in the snow. She could feel eyes on her from every direction, some curious, some pitying, some quietly satisfied. This was not a mistake. They had summoned her here to be rejected publicly, to remove her quietly but officially, wrapped in the clean language of sacred ritual. An inconvenience turned into a lesson. Her father had always said the pack would look after its own. Apparently, she was no longer counted among them. Lena's knees threatened to buckle, but she locked them. If she fell, they would see it. If she sobbed, they would hear it. She refused to give them that. "I understand," she said. The words tasted like frost. Elder Maris inclined her head slightly, as if Lena had just confirmed the weather forecast. Then the terms stand. Somewhere beyond the circle's edge, a log in one of the great bonfires cracked and collapsed, sending a whirl of sparks into the air. The glow painted the faces of the watching wolves in flickering orange and shadow, turning them into a forest of strangers. "Return to the outer ring," the elder said. "The ritual continues." Lena stepped back on numb legs. The packed earth felt miles away. She became acutely aware of every sound: the crunch of snow under her boots, the hiss of torch flames, the distant snap of tree branches shifting under snow. Cassia shoved through a cluster of onlookers to reach her, eyes blazing. "We're leaving, now." "If I leave the clearing before the ritual ends, they'll say I dishonored the moon," Lena said, though her voice trembled. "They could make it worse." "Worse than exile?" Cassia demanded. Lena didn't answer. She didn't know. She didn't trust what worse might look like in the hands of wolves who had decided she no longer belonged. So she stayed. She stood at the edge of the circle again, where she had begun, but everything had shifted. The same torches, the same pillars and snow and moon, and yet the ground beneath her felt subtly foreign, as if some invisible line had been drawn between the pack and the space she occupied. An exile's shadow, even before dawn. Names kept being called. Wolves kept stepping forward, hands clasping, ceremonies completed. Life went on while her world quietly cracked apart. She stared at the snow beneath her boots, tracing with her gaze the faint lines where someone's heel had carved a half-moon into the slush. If she looked up, she would see faces. She didn't think she could bear it. And yet, after a while, she felt it, that prickling along the back of her neck that meant someone was watching her. Not with idle curiosity, not with disdain, something sharper. She lifted her head despite herself. Across the circle, near one of the blackstone pillars, a man stood half in shadow, tall, broad-shouldered. A heavy cloak hung from his frame, hood pushed back to reveal hair the color of ravens' wings, and a jaw roughened with dark stubble. He wore no obvious rank insignia, no gleaming silver or embroidered sigil, yet wolves near him gave him a little more space than the rest. His eyes, dark, steady, were fixed on her. Not on Cassia, not on the claimed pairs, on Lena. The contact was brief, a single heartbeat, and yet something inside her stuttered. Not a bond, not that fabled spark of the moon's choosing, but a flicker of awareness, sharp and unsettling. He didn't look away when she met his gaze. Most wolves, when caught staring at an omega, would have. They would flush or sneer or pretend their attention had drifted past her to something else. This man held her gaze for 2 long, measured breaths. In the torchlight, his eyes seemed almost black, but there was nothing cruel in them, nothing mocking, only a depth she couldn't immediately read, like dark water at night. Then Elder Maris called another name, and bodies shifted, blocking her view. When the crowd parted again, the space near the pillar was empty. Lena wasn't sure if she had imagined him. The mind did strange things when it was trying not to shatter. The ritual finally ended with a final clash of staffs and an invocation to the moon. Wolves began to peel away in clusters, some laughing, some subdued, their breath rising in clouds as they headed back toward the sprawling warmth of the pack house or the narrow streets of the village below. Cassia turned to her. "You're coming home with me," she said. It wasn't a question. "You're not spending the night alone in that little house on the East Ridge while they sharpen their gossip." "I have to pack," Lena said numbly. Cassia's face tightened. "You are not accepting this. What would you have me do?" Lena's voice stayed low, but the strain under it was there now, like a fraying thread. "Fight the elders, challenge the alpha. I'm an Omega, Cass. I don't have rank. I don't have a mate. By dawn, I don't have a pack." "You have me," Cassia said fiercely. Lena's throat burned. "And they could strip you of everything for standing with me." Cassia opened her mouth, then closed it again, jaw flexing with words she didn't say. Lena reached out and touched her wrist, a brief, grateful press. "Let me at least say goodbye properly. To my home, to my father's tools. If I leave them behind, they'll rust in someone's shed. He'd hate that." Cassia's eyes softened at the mention of him. He had built half the warrior barracks after storms years ago. Even now, some of them still spoke of him with quiet respect. "You're not walking back alone," Cassia said at last. "I won't," Lena forced a thin smile. "I'll be fine. No one bothers with an Omega on a night full of new bonds and celebrations." It was almost true. Cassia hesitated, then nodded once, reluctantly. "I'll give you an hour," she said. "If you're not at my door by then, I'm coming to drag you out myself." Lena nodded. "Deal." They parted at the edge of the clearing, Cassia swallowed by a knot of warriors, Lena taking the narrow path that wound up toward the ridge. The noise of the clearing faded behind her, replaced by the soft hiss of falling snow from high branches and the creak of frost settling into bark. The air grew sharper the higher she climbed. Beneath her cloak, she could feel the faint tremor in her muscles, the exhaustion that came not from physical exertion, but from holding herself together for too long. Her little house waited where it always did, tucked at the very edge of the pack's territory, its single window glowing faintly from the ember she had banked in the hearth before leaving for the ritual. It had been her father's before it was hers. Soon it might belong to no one. She pushed the door open and stepped inside, breathing in the familiar scents. Wood shavings, old leather, the faint underlying trace of the man who had raised her. The smell was fading slowly, year by year, but tonight it seemed stronger, as if memory itself had thickened the air. Lena closed the door behind her and rested her forehead against the rough wood. For the first time since stepping into the circle, the tight control around her chest cracked. Her shoulders shook once, twice. A sound escaped her, half sob, half bitter laugh. "Well," she whispered into the dim room, "that could have gone better." Silence answered her. She wiped her cheeks with the heel of her hand, annoyed at the dampness there. Tears wouldn't help. Tears wouldn't change the law or soften the Alpha's decision. By dawn, she would have to cross the border, alone, banished from the only home she had ever known, cast out into rogue-haunted forests and territories that did not tolerate trespassers, unless she somehow found a mate in less than a day. The idea was so absurd she almost laughed again. She turned from the door and moved to the small table where her father's tools lay precisely arranged, just as he had left them on the last day his hands had been strong enough to hold them. She trailed her fingers along the worn handles. "I'm sorry," she murmured. "I tried." A gust of wind rattled the shutters. Somewhere outside, a wolf howled, the sound distant but wild. Lena straightened. Enough. She would not stand here and crumble. There were things she could still control. What she took with her. How she left. The way she held herself, even as everything else was stripped away. She moved with quiet efficiency, retrieving the simple canvas pack from beneath her bed and laying it open on the quilt. A change of clothes. Her father's smallest carving knife, wrapped carefully in cloth. The silver bracelet from her wrist. A loaf of coarse bread. A wedge of hard cheese. A water skin. A single, carefully folded sketch of the house, drawn clumsily in charcoal years ago when she had first learned to hold the world on paper. She placed each item with care. Each choice was a small defiance. I was here. I mattered. She was reaching for the pack's drawstrings when the hairs along the back of her neck lifted again. Not from memory this time, from presence. Her wolf, quiet and bruised all evening, stirred uneasily. Lena's hand froze. Slowly, she straightened, listening. The wind moaned faintly outside. Snow whispered against the roof. The old beams creaked. And beneath it all, the soft crunch of footsteps on frozen ground, approaching her door. Her heart slammed once, hard enough to hurt. Exiles did not usually get visitors, not unless someone intended to make sure they were gone. She crossed the room in 3 swift, soundless steps and closed her fingers around the iron poker leaning near the hearth. Its weight was reassuring, solid in her hand. The footsteps stopped directly outside. A brief pause. Then, 3 measured knocks sounded against the door. Lena tightened her grip on the poker. "Who is it?" There was a heartbeat's delay. Then a deep, steady voice answered through the wood. "Kyle Thorne," he said. "Alpha of the Northern Ridge. I was at the ritual." Lena's pulse stumbled. The man by the black stone pillar, the dark eyes that hadn't looked away. "I saw what they did," he said quietly. "And I think the moon made a mistake in staying silent." He paused. When he spoke again, his words fell into the little house like stones into still water, sending ripples through everything she thought she knew about her future. "If you'll open the door, Lena," Kyle said, "I have a proposition that might keep you from crossing that border alone." Lena did not open the door immediately. She stood in the narrow space between the hearth and the table, iron poker held low in her hand, listening to the quiet beyond the wood. Snow shifted softly outside. The wind pressed once against the frame and moved on. The man did not knock again. He waited. "Say it again," she called, her voice steadier than she felt. "Your name." "Kyle Thorne," he replied, "Alpha of the Northern Ridge." Her grip tightened. The Northern Ridge lay outside Shadow Ridge's inner hierarchy, close enough to be known, distant enough to be inconvenient. Kyle Thorne was not part of Darius's inner circle. He rarely came to pack gatherings. When he did, he kept to the edges. She had noticed him tonight because he had been watching her. "Why are you here?" she asked. There was a brief pause, as if he chose his words with care. "Because you don't have until morning unless someone intervenes." That was not an answer. She stepped closer to the door, enough that she could see the faint outline of boots through the narrow gap beneath it. Large boots, planted solidly, not pacing, not angling for position. "You should go," she said. "If you're seen here—" "I already have been." That stopped her. Kyle lowered his voice, not to hide it, but to keep it contained. "2 hunters followed me from the clearing. I lost them near the river, but word will spread. By now, everyone knows where you live." Her wolf stirred uneasily. "You're not here out of kindness," Lena said. It wasn't accusation, just fact. "Why?" Another pause. Longer this time. "At the ritual," Kyle said slowly. "When Darius rejected you, did you feel anything at all?" The question landed harder than she expected. Lena's first instinct was anger, not sharp, but tired. Every wolf thought they had the right to dissect her failure tonight, to ask what she'd felt, what she'd hoped, where she'd fallen short. "No," she said flatly. "I felt nothing. Does that disappoint you?" "No," Kyle said. "It confirms it." Her fingers tightened on the poker. "Confirms what?" "That the bond is dormant." Silence stretched between them. That's not how bonds work, Lena said after a beat. They awaken or they don't. That's how common bonds work. The word common snagged something deep in her chest. You shouldn't be saying this to me, she said, though her voice had gone quieter. If the elders hear— They already suspect, Kyle interrupted. That's why Darius called you forward. Her breath caught. No, he didn't know whose bond it was, Kyle continued, calm but unyielding. Only that something unusual had been sensed near the pack borders months ago. A fluctuation, dormant, buried, rare enough to make people nervous. Lena stared at the door. Her thoughts scattered, then slammed together again. They called me forward to humiliate me. Yes. To erase me. Yes. Her throat tightened. And it worked. Kyle's voice dropped another fraction. Not completely. Something in his tone, steady, grounded, made her lower the poker slightly. Not fully, just enough to listen. You stood where you were told to stand, he said. You accepted the rejection. You didn't beg, you didn't challenge him. That matters. She let out a quiet, incredulous breath. It doesn't matter at all. I have hours left in pack territory, then I'm gone. Not if you're claimed before dawn. She pressed her forehead briefly to the door, the cold wood seeping into her skin. I don't have a mate, she said. If you're here to tell me I should start knocking on doors. I'm here because I believe that if the bond awakens, it will awaken with me. The words were not dramatic. They weren't delivered like a declaration. They were simply stated, as if he were laying a truth on the table and stepping back to let her decide what to do with it. Lena closed her eyes. Her heart thudded painfully. You said the bond was dormant, she whispered. It is. Then how can you be so sure? Because for the first time, Kyle hesitated. When you stepped into the circle, he said at last, I felt a pressure. Not the pull of claiming, not recognition. Something older, like standing over deep water and knowing it moves, even if the surface is still. Her breath hitched despite herself. It didn't answer me, he continued, which told me it wasn't ready, or it wasn't mine to activate yet. Darius rejected you because nothing answered him either. He assumed that meant there was nothing there. And you didn't? No, Kyle said. I assumed it meant the moon wasn't finished. She laughed once, weak and humorless. That's a lot to stake on an assumption. Yes? And if you're wrong? Then I'm wrong, he said simply, and I will still have stood between you and the dawn. Lena opened the door. Cold air rushed inside, carrying snowflakes that melted instantly against the hearth's warmth. Kyle stood on the threshold, tall and broad in his dark cloak, hood pushed back, snow dusting his shoulders. Up close, he smelled faintly of pine resin and steel. His eyes met hers, not burning, not softened by sentiment, steady, present. This doesn't make sense, she said. If you're an alpha, why aren't you inside the pack house celebrating like the others? Because I don't lead like Darius does, Kyle said, and because I don't take what isn't freely given. A bitter smile tugged at her mouth. Freedom isn't exactly abundant tonight. No, he agreed. That's why I'm not claiming you. Her brows knit. What? Not yet, he clarified. A forced claiming, even one that saves your life, would poison whatever bond exists between us. I won't do that to you. The wind stirred his cloak. Snow creaked underfoot behind him. Another sound, distant, but real. They're already moving, he said. Rival hunters, wolves who think an unprotected Omega is easy leverage. Her wolf stirred again, frightened now. You can't stay here, Kyle continued. By sunrise, this house will be watched, maybe worse. Cassia's words echoed in her mind. You're not spending the night alone. Then where do I go? Lena asked. Kyle extended his hand, not close enough to touch her, not forcing her space, just offering. My territory lies along the ridge, he said. It's within reach before dawn. It's not Shadow Ridge land, but it's not hostile ground either. And after dawn, she asked. His jaw set. After dawn, the law no longer protects you anywhere. That's when a mate must stand beside you, or you run. The truth of it pressed down on her, heavy and unavoidable. If I go with you, she said slowly, they'll call it abduction, or manipulation. They'll call it whatever lets them sleep, Kyle said. But the ritual law is clear. Until dawn, you may move freely. No one may force you from pack lands, and no one may stop you from choosing where you stand. She looked at his hand. Strong, unmarked by silver or ceremony. And if nothing awakens, she asked quietly, then I'll get you across the border alive. Her chest tightened. Why? Kyle met her gaze fully now. Because someone already decided your worth tonight, and they were wrong. The house creaked softly around them. The hearth popped, sending a brief flare of heat into the room. Lena glanced once at the packed canvas on her bed, at her father's knife, her bracelet, the life she was being pushed out of whether she chose to leave now or later. When she took Kyle's hand, it was not dramatic. There was no spark, no rush of power, just warmth, solid and real. Then let's not waste the night, she said. Kyle nodded. Stay close. Don't run unless I tell you to. She almost smiled. Outside, the path toward the ridge vanished into falling snow, the moon already beginning its slow descent. Dawn was coming, and somewhere beneath the surface of her silence, something old and waiting stirred. The ridge rose steeply, the path narrowing until it could barely be called one at all. Snow had gathered in uneven drifts between rock and scrub pine, and the wind bit harder the higher they climbed, clawing at Lena's cloak and burning her lungs with every breath. Kyle moved ahead of her without a word, his steps deliberate, quiet despite his size. He didn't hurry, not because there wasn't danger, but because panic wasted strength. When he slowed, she slowed. When he stepped over a patch of ice, he reached back without looking, his hand finding her wrist with sure precision before she slipped. There was no tenderness in the gesture, no claim, just practicality. They were nearly to the ridge when the scent hit her, wrong, sharp, carrying the metallic edge of unfamiliar wolves. Her steps faltered. Kyle stopped instantly. He turned, lifted a finger once, and she froze. Two figures moved below them, dark shapes threading through the trees where the path dipped back toward Shadow Ridge. They weren't trying to hide. They didn't have to. Scavengers, Kyle murmured. They'll circle, test me to see if I'm serious. Her pulse hammered. They're not pack. Her pulse hammered. They're not pack. No. And they know. Yes. He glanced at her, eyes hard now. They know what you are tonight. An unprotected Omega. Her wolf pressed closer to the surface of her thoughts, tense and wary. The ridge suddenly felt very narrow, the drop to either side steeper than she remembered. Kyle shifted slightly so his body blocked her from the slope below, a subtle thing, instinctive. They won't attack unless they think they can win, he said. They'll test the perimeter first. Like wolves do, Lena said. Yes? He studied the tree line, then nodded once. We're close enough. Move. They broke into motion again, climbing fast now. The air grew thinner, the wind sharper, but the path opened suddenly into a natural shelf cut into the stone, a broad, sheltered hollow backed by rock and overhung by twisted pines. A fire pit sat dead center, ringed with smooth stones darkened by years of use. Kyle ushered her inside and turned immediately, scanning the approach. Only after he was satisfied did he move to the fire pit, striking flint with practiced speed. Sparks leapt, flame caught. Lena sagged against the rock wall, legs trembling. Her breath came shallow, uneven. "You should sit," Kyle said without looking at her. She did. The stone was cold, but solid. The fire grew steadily, its warmth pushing back the bite of the night. Kyle shed his cloak and draped it over her shoulders without comment. It smelled like pine and smoke and something darker underneath. "I don't need—" "You do," he said calmly. "Your body's reacting to fear and cold. It's not weakness, it's chemistry." She stopped protesting and accepted it. "Thank you." For a few moments, neither of them spoke. The fire crackled softly. Snow hissed as it melted at the edge of the flames. Above them, the moon slid lower, steady and pitiless. "You're not afraid," Lena said finally. Kyle glanced at her. "Yes, I am." She frowned. "I'm just not letting it decide for me," he continued. "There's a difference." She wrapped the cloak tighter around herself. "Darius will be furious. He already is. You defied him the moment you stepped onto Shadow Ridge land tonight." Kyle met her gaze. "No, I defied him the moment he used law to erase someone." She looked away, throat tightening again. "Do you know how many Omegas have left Packlands quietly?" he went on. "Slipped away without ceremony, without witnesses. No one remembers their names." Lena swallowed. "You're saying I should be grateful I was humiliated publicly?" "No," Kyle said. "I'm saying it left witnesses, and witnesses make erasure difficult." A shout echoed faintly below them, voices raised, calling out to one another. The scavengers. Kyle rose in one smooth motion and moved to the edge of the shelf. His posture changed, shoulders squared, weight balanced. The alpha was unmistakable now. "They're closer," Lena said. "Yes. Should I stay?" The word just firm enough to be obeyed. She stayed. Kyle stepped fully into view, letting the firelight catch him, letting himself be seen. "Turn back," he called, his voice carrying cleanly over the rocks. "This ground is claimed tonight." A figure laughed below, harsh and careless. "By whom?" "By me." Silence followed, heavy, measuring. Then another voice, cooler. "Shadow Ridge law stripped her protection." "Shadow Ridge law doesn't reach this ridge," Kyle replied. "You know that." A pause. Snow shifted. "You'll take her yourself then?" the first voice taunted. "Claim her before dawn?" Kale didn't answer immediately. Lena felt it then. Not fear this time, but something like pressure building beneath her ribs. Her wolf stirred sharply, hackles raised in her mind. "I will defend her until the sun rises," Kyle said at last. "If the moon decides more, that will not be your concern." The pause stretched. "Too much effort for one Omega," the voice said finally. "Then leave," Kyle said. The figures retreated, melting back into the trees with reluctant caution. They weren't convinced, not fully, but they weren't ready to test him yet. Kyle remained still long after they were gone, listening, scenting the air. Only when he was sure did he turn back to the fire. "They'll return," Lena said quietly. "Yes. And Darius?" "Yes." She let out a slow breath. "So we're trapped between wolves who want to use me and wolves who want me gone." Omegas were easy to disregard, and easier to take, once the law stopped standing between them and other wolves. "That's one way to put it." He paused. "Another is that you're standing at the center of a fight no one expected you to survive." She almost laughed at that. Almost. The night deepened. The fire burned lower. Kyle fed it sparingly, careful not to let it flare too high and give their position away. At some point, exhaustion crept over Lena like a heavy blanket. Her thoughts blurred. Her muscles ached. She hadn't realized how tightly she'd been holding herself together until she felt herself sag. Kyle noticed immediately. "Lie back," he said, gesturing to the bedroll he'd unrolled near the stone wall. "Rest while you can." She hesitated. You don't sleep? I will later. She didn't argue. The ground was hard, but the cloak and bedroll made it bearable. As she lay back, staring up at the sliver of sky visible through the pines, she felt the strange pressure again, stronger now, warmer. Not a voice, not a command, a presence. Her breath hitched, her wolf surged, sharp and sudden. "Kyle," she whispered. He was at her side in an instant. "What is it?" "I don't know," she said, brow furrowing. "Something's changing." He stilled. Carefully, he lowered himself to one knee beside her, close but not touching. "Describe it." "It feels like awareness," she said slowly. "Like I'm noticing things I didn't before. The fire, the wind, you." His jaw tightened. "And underneath," she continued, eyes unfocused now, "there's something else. Quiet. Waiting." Kyle closed his eyes briefly. When he opened them again, his gaze was steady, solemn. "That's the bond," he said. "Not awakening. Not yet. Just stretching." Her fingers curled into the bedroll. "Is that dangerous?" "It can be," he admitted. "If forced, if rushed." She swallowed. "And if we don't? Then it will decide its own moment." The pressure eased slightly, settling instead of growing. Lena exhaled shakily. "I don't feel powerful," she said. "I don't feel chosen." Kyle's expression softened, not into sentiment, but into something quietly sure. "Good," he said. "Neither did any of the rare ones I've known." She frowned weakly. "You've known others?" "None like this," he said. The words sank into her slowly, heavy with implication. Above them, clouds slid across the moon, dimming the light. The night tilted toward its deepest hour. "Kyle," Lena said after a while. "Yes, if dawn comes and nothing happens." He didn't interrupt her this time. "If dawn comes," she finished, "you'll have to let me go." His eyes held hers. "If dawn comes," he said, "and the bond remains silent, we'll run." Her chest tightened. "And your territory? Your people?" "We'll survive," he said simply. "Alphas are replaceable. Lives aren't." The statement struck her harder than any declaration could have. She turned onto her side, facing the fire, the ridge wall warm at her back. Sleep tugged at her despite herself. As she drifted, the pressure beneath her ribs pulsed once, quiet, deliberate, like a heartbeat she was only just learning to hear. Somewhere below, a wolf howled. Another answered. Dawn was coming, and the ridge would not remain quiet for long. Dawn did not arrive gently. It came hard and pale, the sky bleeding slowly from black into steel gray, the moon thinning as it slipped toward the horizon. The night's cold lingered, sharp and unforgiving, refusing to loosen its grip even as the first light crept across the ridge. Lena woke to stillness. The fire had burned down to coals, glowing faintly. The wind had stilled, as if the mountain itself were holding its breath. For a moment, she lay without moving, listening, to the slow beat of her own heart, to the faint crackle of embers, to the quiet presence beside her. Kyle stood at the edge of the shelf, eyes on the eastern sky. He hadn't slept. She could see it in the tension of his shoulders, the way his focus never wavered. "How long?" she asked softly. "Minutes," he said. Her chest tightened. Dawn. The hour that stripped away the last thin shield of law. She pushed herself upright, the cloak sliding from her shoulders. Cold bit immediately, but she barely noticed. What she noticed was the pressure beneath her ribs, no longer quiet, no longer simply waiting. It had weight now. Direction. Something shifted. Lena sucked in a breath. Her wolf surged forward, not in panic this time, but in recognition. The world sharpened. the scent of pine and snow, the distant musk of other wolves moving through the trees, the steady heat of Kyle's presence like a constant at her side. "Kyle," she whispered. He turned instantly. His gaze met hers, and something in him stilled, as if he had felt it too. "It's waking," he said. The words settled into her bones like truth. Footsteps sounded below, many this time, not scavengers circling cautiously, but wolves moving with purpose. Voices carried up the slope, sharp and unhidden. "They're coming," Lena said. "Yes," Cale replied, and this time they brought witnesses. Shadow Ridge wolves emerged from the tree line, warriors in familiar leathers, elders wrapped in heavy cloaks. At their center walked Darius Nightfall, his expression carved from stone. He had not expected to find her here. That much showed in the brief tightening of his jaw. "You should have crossed the border," Darius called. "Dawn has come." Kyle stepped forward, placing himself squarely between Lena and the approaching pack. "She has not crossed the border," Kyle said evenly, "and until she does, exile is not complete." Murmurs rippled through the gathered wolves. "Pack law is clear," Darius said coldly. "An unclaimed Omega departs by dawn." Kyle did not raise his voice. He didn't need to. "Pack law is also clear," he said, "that exile is enforced only if no mate stands for her." Darius's eyes flicked briefly to Lena, dismissive. "And does one?" The pressure inside her flared. Lena's breath caught as something inside her shifted fully into place, not like lightning, not like fire, like alignment, pieces sliding together with quiet inevitability. The weight beneath her ribs resolved into a steady pull, unmistakable now, centered on the man standing before her. Kyle stiffened, his hand clenched at his side, breath catching just once. There it was. The bond rose between them, not blazing, not violent, but deep and resonant. A current instead of a spark, ancient, awake. Lena stepped forward before fear could catch her, before doubt could drag her back. "Yes," she said. Darius went still. "That bond is real," Elder Maris said quietly, stepping forward despite herself. Her eyes were fixed not on Kyle, but on Lena. Dormant bonds answer slowly, rarely, but when they do, she trailed off, awe threading reluctantly into her voice. Kyle turned then, fully facing Lena. For the first time since the night began, something unguarded crossed his face. Not triumph, recognition. "This is your choice," he said quietly, for her alone. "Say it again, if you mean it." She met his gaze, feeling the bond settle, not claiming her, not overtaking her, simply there. "I choose you," Lena said. The moon slipped fully below the horizon. Dawn broke. For a heartbeat, no one moved. Then Kyle straightened, alpha presence rolling outward, undeniable now. "I claim Lena Ashwood as my mate," he said, voice ringing across the ridge. "Before witnesses, by choice, by bond." Silence crushed the clearing. Darius looked at the elders, then back at Lena. For the first time, uncertainty flickered across his face. He had tried to end a possibility. Instead, he had exposed it. "The law is satisfied," Elder Maris said at last. It was not pleased, but it was final. The bond flared once, acknowledgement, not display, and then settled into quiet strength. Lena exhaled, a sound she hadn't realized she'd been holding back for years. Kyle stepped closer, not touching her yet, but standing at her side. With him there, the ridge no longer felt narrow. Darius turned away first. The pack followed, some reluctantly, some relieved. None challenged what had been done. As the last of them disappeared into the trees, Lena let her shoulders sag. "It's over," she said. "No," Kyle replied softly. "It's rewritten." She looked at him then, really looked at him, and for the first time, the future didn't feel like a thing she had to outrun. The night had rejected her. The dawn had chosen her. Snow fell lightly on the ridge, softer now, the season turning at last. The worst of winter had passed, leaving behind something quieter and more forgiving. Lena stood at the edge of the path, watching the last of the patrols return. The wolves moved with familiar ease through the dusk, silhouettes dark against the pale stone and snow. No one watched her with curiosity anymore. No one measured her steps or weighed her presence. She belonged. The realization still caught her off guard sometimes. Kyle approached from behind, his footsteps unhurried. She sensed him before he touched her, the bond responding the way breath responds to cold air, automatic, unforced. "You've been out here a while," he said. "I was thinking," she replied. "That can be dangerous." She smiled. "So I've heard." He stepped closer, his presence at her back warm and steady. For a moment, he didn't touch her at all, as if giving her space even now. Then his hand came to rest at her waist, not claiming, not possessive, simply there. It made her breathe easier every time. "I never thanked you," she said quietly. Kyle frowned faintly. "For what?" "For seeing me," she said. He turned her gently to face him. The evening light caught the planes of his face, softened the sharpness others often mistook for distance. When he looked at her like this, focused, intent, she felt no urge to shrink or brace herself. "I didn't save you," he said. "I know," she replied. "You chose me." Something settled in his expression then, something final and unmistakable. He lifted his hand, hesitated only a heartbeat, then brushed his thumb along her cheek. The touch was careful, reverent, as if he were still learning the shape of something precious. "You stood when the pack turned away," he said. "You didn't beg. You didn't harden yourself to survive it. That's not weakness." Her throat tightened. She covered his hand with her own. "I was afraid," she admitted. "I know. And you stayed." "Yes." He leaned closer, not rushing, giving her every chance to step back. She didn't. Their kiss was deep and grounding, the kind that carried weight and heat. Sparks lit up her nerve endings, from where their lips met all the way down to her toes. His mouth was warm against hers, firm but unhurried, as if he had nowhere else to be and no reason to rush what felt inevitable. Lena's fingers curled into the front of his tunic without conscious thought. She felt him respond, not with urgency, but with certainty. His other hand came up, cradling the back of her neck, anchoring her there as the bond between them surged softly, fully awake. When they parted, their foreheads rested together, breath mingling in the cold air. "This," she murmured, eyes still closed, "feels real." Kyle's thumb traced a slow line along her jaw. "It is." She opened her eyes. "I think I've been in love with you since the moment you knocked on my door." His breath caught, just slightly, enough to matter. "I think," he said quietly, "I've been waiting longer than that." He kissed her again, surprised this time, a little less guarded, like a man no longer holding himself apart from what he wanted. She leaned into him fully, resting her weight against his chest, feeling the solid truth of him beneath her hands. The ridge settled around them. Wolves moved in the distance. The moon rose without ceremony. Lena rested her head against Kyle's shoulder, his arms secure around her now, unmistakably so. No law stood between them. No ritual needed to justify what they had chosen. She had been rejected once. She would never be forgotten again.